As revolution sweeps across the Middle East, the Western media is attempting to keep up with events, and it's becoming more and more focused on certain areas. Of course, there are many areas under contention right now with the various revolutions that are going on. But one area in particular that is being ignored by the Western media is the country of Iraq, who seems to be receiving no coverage from Western media. If you were politically naive, you would wonder why the U.S. media has been blatantly ignoring the uprisings that have been occurring in Iraq in these recent times. Of course, you would think that the American people would want to know what's happening. After all, they have tens of thousands of U.S. troops stationed there. So you would think that in the popular consciousness they wanted to be aware of what was going on, especially if people were rebelling against the government. But once you think about it, I think the reason why it's not being covered is fairly obvious. As petty dictators like Muammar Gaddafi are getting thrown out, and the rest of them are being threatened with being thrown out, the puppet running Iraq right now is also under threat of being thrown out. But the media is ignoring this. But you would think that the American people would want to see it. After all, they've invested about $1 trillion in the endeavor so far. And they've also invested the lives of thousands of their own soldiers in building that puppet government inside Iraq. So you'd think it'd be kind of important to cover it. If one was to follow the cue of the U.S. media, one would think that the people of America are no longer interested in coverage of the situation in Iraq, which would seem strange given the amount of resources, the $1 trillion that have been spent on the war thus far, and the lives of thousands of their own soldiers. So you'd think that the media would pay a little bit more attention to a potential revolution that's taking place in the country to throw out the petty dictator, the U.S. puppet, that the American people have invested so much in building. Unless the people of Iraq want freedom and social justice. On Wednesday, February 25th, masses and masses of the Iraqi people took to the streets to demonstrate against the puppet regime of the Iraqi government. With all that happened, the people that were killed, the events that took place, the Western media, particularly the United States media, showed almost no interest. The U.S. media blatantly ignored Iraqi security forces, killing 15 people, injuring 130 others. A story like this might not make the American taxpayer feel very well, as after all, they've funded this government so far, and they funded the entire liberation of the country that put the current president into power. The Iraqi protesters took to the streets peacefully but forcefully, making demands of their leaders. Despite attempts by Iraqi security forces to limit the amount that the protesters could do, they still managed to resist police and those same security forces and force their way into the Green Zone, the area where many U.S. occupation officials are stationed, along with the Iraqi parliament. The police thus far have been unable to stop the protests by the Iraqi people. The Iraqi people were also able to overcome concrete barricades that were made over the Jamhuriya Bridge that was attempting to block protesters from meeting up with other groups of protesters. The streets were filled with people demanding a return of employment. Iraq has one of the highest unemployment rates in the region. This has been a major cause of social unrest in the country, as typically when the formal economy fails, people turn to the informal economy not just to be able to make a living, but to be able to survive in an environment like Iraq. And what may be the biggest insults to the Iraqi people, they're protesting the continued rolling blackouts across the country. Usually they're only getting about 4 hours a day of electricity. Now this was one of the things that George W. Bush previously said right after the mission was accomplished, or the main combat was over, that they would be returning electricity, which one of the major priorities, which he placed in the hands of Halliburton, that we've yet to see actually happen. It's also very ironic that there's power shortages in a country with the world's second largest energy reserve of oil. Then again, most of the oil fields in Iraq are in the hands of Western oil interests. An encouraging sign to me in all of this was the absolute zero religious sectarian violence that took place during the protests. Not one religious group attacked another. Shiites, Sunnis, Kurds, they all protested against the illegitimate government that stands in Iraq. It's heartwarming, and it's an absolute positive sign to see all the various religious groups within Iraq protesting together instead of attacking each other. In a strange turn of events, a known radical Muslim cleric, Muqtada al-Sadr, has come out against the protests and has defended the Iraqi government in its brutal crackdown of the people, which is very strange given his adamant protest against the Iraqi government and the occupation in the past. This is what he said. They are attempting to crack down on everything you have gained, all the democratic gains, the free elections, the peaceful exchanges of power and freedom. So I call on you from a place of compassion to thwart the enemy plans, not by participating in the demonstrations tomorrow, because it's suspicious, and it will give rise to the voice of those who destroyed Iraq. This is a position quite strange for someone who previously objected to pretty much every form of government that was proposed for Iraq. In my opinion, this may have something to do with his party gaining a good number of seats. I think the rebellious spirit against the occupation has dulled somewhat now that Muqtada al-Sadr has gained some form of government power. To me, this would certainly indicate that if his true belief was to liberate Iraq from the occupation, he is now a traitor on that cause. It is very clear by now that none of the political parties in Iraq have any intention of removing the U.S. occupation from the country. It's very obvious by now that the Iraqi people are going to have to unite outside of the mainstream political system in order to obtain their freedom from U.S. domination. Unfortunately, the only party that really stood in opposition to the occupation was the Communist Party of Iraq, who, upon their first election after Saddam, gained 2 seats, and then they mysteriously were removed from the electoral process. So I would like to think that the Communist Party of Iraq would have opposed the occupation, and I believe it would have, but we'll never know now. It is absolutely necessary for the people of Iraq to unite outside of this political system in order to push for their freedom and remove the imperialists that are occupying their country quite unjustly. The people of Iraq have the support of the Maoist Rebel News, and I'm certain that the people of Iraq have the support of the subscribers of the Maoist Rebel News as well. We all stand together. We either all get liberation or none of us do.